A day for pride. The worn chamois coaxed a subtle sheen from the leather. Mac buffed Jason's small dress shoe again, an almost compulsive act now that it gleamed. It was his ritual, a physical outlet for the simmering anxiety. He used to polish Sarah's combat boots before each deployment, each swipe a whispered plea for her safety. Now, it was Jason's turn. Fifth grade graduation, a quantum leap. He checked the wall clock, 7:15. The ceremony wasn't until 9. He sighed, setting the shoe carefully on the newspaper-covered table. Early, naturally, waiting had become a constant backdrop to his existence. The stillness of the house pressed in on him. Jason still lay lost in slumber, a boy-shaped knot of limbs and blonde hair amidst dinosaur-printed sheets. He should let him sleep, guard these dwindling moments of untroubled youth before the day's whirlwind. But the quiet was a suffocating blanket. He drifted to the window, gazing at the somber street. Across the way, houses remained hushed, their occupants swaddled in dreams. He recalled Sarah, her laughter once echoing through a similar house. Their shared dream, a vibrant, child-filled home. He'd deliver the chaos. She'd missed the chance to witness it. A familiar ache constricted his chest. Lately, he'd become adept at avoiding thoughts of her, burying the memories beneath a mountain of obligations. But today the levee was cracking. He could almost sense her presence, a feather-light touch on his forearm. He pictured her beaming at Jason, her eyes alight with pride. She'd have orchestrated a cookie extravaganza for the after-party, draped the house with balloons, undoubtedly shedding tears through the entire event. He swallowed against the sudden thickness in his throat. He picked up the remaining shoe, the leather cool and smooth. He polished it with the same focused energy, each rub a silent dialogue with Sarah's ghost. "He's a good kid, Sarah," he rasped, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. "Intelligent, resilient. He reminds me of you at times." He finished, placing it beside its partner. They looked pathetically small, these emblems of his son's approaching milestone. He needed action, anything. He slipped into Jason's room. The boy remained motionless. Mac lingered in the doorway, simply watching him sleep. His face was serene, devoid of the worries that shadowed Mac's waking hours. Quietly, he gathered the clothes Jason had carefully laid out the night before. A starched button-down, navy slacks, and a tie Sarah had chosen years ago, before everything had fractured. He carried them to the bathroom, arranging them on the counter. Back in the kitchen, he brewed coffee, the heady aroma cutting through the stillness. He poured a cup, black as night, and sat at the table, his gaze locked on Jason's gleaming shoes. By 8, the neighborhood was slowly awakening. Cars whispered by, and the buzz of a lawnmower intruded through the window. Mac nudged Jason awake. "Hey, sleepyhead," he said, his voice rough with affection. "Big day." Jason groaned and burrowed deeper into the pillow. "Just 5 more minutes," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Mac chuckled softly. "Can't do it, pal. Time to rise and shine." Jason pushed himself up reluctantly, rubbing his eyes. "What time is it?" "Time to make some memories," Mac replied, a smile tugging at his lips. The drive to school was brief, yet felt like an age. Mac's grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles bone-white. He felt the weight of expectation, thick in the air. Jason's, his own, and the phantom echo of Sarah's. The parking area was a mass of vehicles upon their arrival. Mac located a space towards the back and switched off the engine. He inhaled deeply, trying to quell the frantic hammering of his heart. The auditorium was filling rapidly as they entered. Parents, grandparents, siblings, a collective sea of eager faces. Max scanned the crowd, hunting for available seating. He spotted one near the front, favorably close to the stage. He navigated Jason through the swarm of people, ignoring the jostling and murmurs. They settled into their seats, surrounded by the growing buzz of excited conversation. A tap on his shoulder. Mac turned to face Mrs. Davison, Jason's 5th grade teacher, her smile radiant. "Mr. McKinley," she said warmly. "So pleased you're here. Jason has been such a joy to teach this year." "Thank you," Mac said, his voice slightly strained. "He has been working diligently." Mrs. Davison's smile softened slightly. He's a clever child, and remarkably adaptable. Mac nodded, his gaze fixed forward on the stage. Adaptable. A polite term, perhaps. He understood adaptability intimately. He had to master it. The auditorium doors swung open, and another surge of parents poured in, searching for unoccupied seats. The noise intensified, and the air thickened with anticipation. Mac glanced at Jason, who was squirming in his seat, his eyes bright with excitement. Mac reached over and gave his son's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Just breathe, buddy," he said. "You've got this." Jason grinned, his nervousness temporarily abated. "I know, Dad." As the principal ascended the stage, a hush settled over the room. Mac leaned forward, his vision focused on his son. His pride swelled, an overwhelming sensation, and he knew, with unshakable certainty, that Sarah would have been equally proud. He imagined her at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes sparkling with adoration. For Jason, for him, for the life they had forged, however fleetingly. The knot in his chest eased slightly, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips. This was a day for celebration, a day for optimism, a day dedicated to Jason. Unwelcome interruption. The squeak of Jason's polished shoes on the gymnasium floor barely registered against the rising chorus of parental chatter and restless children. Mac, a sturdy bulwark at the room's edge, watched the throng. Scanning the assembled faces was second nature, a habit forged in years of safeguarding Sarah, a vigilance that lingered still. A dull ache resonated in his chest, a familiar echo of loss interwoven with fierce paternal care for Jason. Two figures peeled away from the wall, their movements deliberate, almost robotic. Burly men in dark blue security uniforms, the fabric pulled taut across their frames. They wore expressions of manufactured severity. Unease prickled Mac's skin as they approached. "Sir," the taller one rumbled, his voice a low frequency easily lost in the surrounding hubbub. He clutched a clipboard as if it were a riot shield. "Identification, please." Mac's brow furrowed, his gaze steady. "Why is that necessary?" The second guard interjected, his tone edged with accusation. "There's a discrepancy with the sign-in manifest." He shifted his weight, eyes flitting about the room, anticipating what? Trouble? "Are you on the authorized guest roster for this commencement?" "I'm Jason McKinley's father," Mac stated, his voice level. He inclined his head toward the stage, where Jason stood a small figure lost in a sea of maroon gowns. "He's graduating today." The first guard consulted the clipboard, then his eyes returned to Mac, his expression unyielding. "McKinley, that name doesn't appear here. Access is restricted to approved individuals only." "There must be a mistake," Mac replied, a cold dread coiling in his gut. He had RSVP'd weeks earlier, painstakingly completing the form and mailing it to Jason's teacher. He vividly recalled Sarah's meticulous review, her brow creased as she verified each detail. "I sent in the RSVP. Jason is expecting me." The second guard scoffed a dismissive sound. "Errors occur. Nonetheless, protocol is clear. If your name isn't present, access is denied. You'll need to vacate the premises at once." He closed the distance, invading Mac's personal space. The air vibrated with unspoken challenge. Mac held his ground, jaw tight. Intimidation was a futile tactic with him. His Marine years had instilled an unshakable resolve, a commitment to protect what mattered. And in that moment, Jason's happiness was paramount. "I'm not going anywhere. My son is graduating. I intend to witness it." "Sir, you're creating a disturbance," the first guard cautioned, his hand drifting instinctively toward his belt. "We'd prefer to avoid a scene, but we will escalate if required." The ambient noise began to dissipate, replaced by an acute awareness of the burgeoning confrontation. Heads swiveled, eyes widened, a wave of disquiet spreading like a stain across the room. Mac met the guard's gaze, his own hardening into flint. The ever-present grief retreated, supplanted by an icy determination. He would not allow anything or anyone to spoil this day for Jason. Not on his watch. "You're making a grave error," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. A cruel smile touched the second guard's lips. "We're simply following procedure. So, will you cooperate, or should we summon reinforcements?" Mac's fists clenched, his muscles straining the worn fabric of his jacket. He felt the familiar heat rising, the adrenaline surge before conflict. He sought no altercation, but he wouldn't be deterred. Not when Jason was involved. The opening notes of Pomp and Circumstance filled the gymnasium, the familiar melody washing over the crowd. Mac's gaze darted to the stage, where Jason's expression revealed raw excitement. He couldn't let this escalate. Not here, not now. Yet, retreat was unthinkable. Torn between impossible alternatives, his heart hammered in his chest. He leveled his gaze at the guards, his resolve unwavering. "This isn't over," Mac murmured, the promise hanging like a storm cloud. A father's plea. "Listen," Mac began, his voice a gravelly rumble, marked by years spent shouting over roaring engines and the din of gunfire. He raised his hands in a gesture of supplication, striving for a composure that eluded him. The muffled cadence of the processional march throbbed in his skull, a relentless pulse. "This isn't about me. It's about my son, Jason McKinley. His graduation day. He's earned this." The junior security officer, a study in hard lines and pristine fabric, barely spared him a glance. He tapped his tablet, the action clipped and dismissive. His older colleague, burdened by a thickening waistline and the map of weariness etched around his eyes, offered a sigh that spoke volumes. "Sir, we understand the situation. Your name simply isn't on the registry. The system's been checked repeatedly." Mac forced a swallow against the lump forming in his throat. "There's been a mistake. I registered weeks ago." Jason, he was practically buzzing with excitement, knowing I'd be here. "Call me every day this week, just to confirm I hadn't forgotten." An image flashed in his mind. Jason's face, illuminated by pure joy, the boyish grin, still punctuated by a missing tooth, that surfaced even now, nearing 18. The prospect of disappointing him was a gut-wrenching pain. "Name and confirmation code, please," the younger guard recited, his tone edged with impatience. Mac's frustration flared. There had been no confirmation code. He'd registered online, clicked submit, and assumed it was settled. Navigating red tape wasn't his forte. He was accustomed to problems solved with elbow grease and ingenuity, not bureaucratic hurdles. "I don't have a code. I just registered. Look, could you double-check? Perhaps under McKinley, Michael." The senior guard rubbed a weary hand over his thinning hair. "We've cross-referenced every McKinley, sir. Several times." He seemed genuinely regretful, yet his posture remained resolute, an unyielding barrier. The music swelled, now a powerful wave, heralding the start of the ceremony. Mac could almost envision Jason, a lone figure in the throng of black gowns and mortarboards, his eager eyes scanning the crowd, seeking a familiar face. "He's probably searching for me right now." Mac's voice caught, betraying his anxiety. He loathed the vulnerability creeping into his tone, but couldn't suppress it. "He said he'd try to spot me the second he took his seat. He's incredibly proud, you know, the first in our family to get a college degree." The younger man shifted his weight, clearly unaffected. The older one, however, seemed to waver for a heartbeat. Mac saw an opening and pressed forward. "He lost his mother a few years back," Mac revealed, the words raw against the tender scar tissue of memory. He rarely spoke of Sarah, the recollections too vivid, too agonizing. But Jason deserved this. She would have been here in the front row if she could. This is also for her. The older guard's expression softened, a hint of understanding flickering in his eyes. But it vanished quickly, replaced by his practiced professional mask. "Sir, I sympathize deeply. But without verification, my hands are tied." "Security mandates." Mac challenged, incredulous. "You're telling me regulations supersede a father witnessing his son's graduation, honoring his mother's memory?" Anger stirred within him, threatening to erupt. He clenched his fists, struggling to contain it. Losing control was not an option now. The young guard advanced a step, his hand instinctively hovering near his sidearm. "Sir, you're creating a disturbance. I must ask you to vacate the premises." Max stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not leaving. I'm not causing a disturbance. I'm simply here to watch my son graduate." He lowered his voice, now pleading. "Please, just one final check. Please, do it for him." The desperation hung thick, an unspoken appeal. He knew he was exposed, shedding the stoicism he usually wore like armor, revealing a vulnerability he typically kept hidden. But Jason was worth any sacrifice. He would swallow his pride, even beg if necessary. The older guard glanced at his younger partner, a silent dialogue passing between them. The younger man shook his head, his jaw rigid. "Negative. Sir, you need to leave. Now." The music reached its peak, the triumphant chords reverberating across the plaza. Mac knew, with a sickening certainty, that Jason was walking across that stage at this very moment. His name was being announced, and his father was absent. Jason's name is called. The auditorium vibrated with sound. An exhalation of pride, a collective sigh of relief and celebration, resonated as the speaker's resonant voice announced, "Jason Michael McKinley." Jason swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly parched. He'd mentally rehearsed this moment countless times, envisioning a poised saunter across the stage. Instead, his limbs felt weighted. He scanned the multitude of faces, seeking something intangible. Reassurance? A beacon of support? Proof this was real? He inhaled, forcing a smile, a fragile, uneasy curve of his lips, and started forward. The cap's tassel brushed his brow with a ticklish whisper. Each footfall seemed magnified, the precise creak of his polished dress shoes ringing in his ears. He felt the burden of expectations, the culmination of years spent in pre-dawn classes, late-night studies, sacrifices borne by both him and his father. His focus remained riveted on the stage, on the beaming principal awaiting him. Just a few more steps, and the triumph, the acknowledgement would be his. Then, a disturbance shattered the atmosphere near the rear of the hall. A shout, laced with frustration, tore through the polite applause. Jason recoiled, his carefully maintained composure fracturing. Towards the back, Max stood firm, jaw clenched. He hadn't anticipated their move. Perhaps, he'd dared to hope, they'd overlook his presence. But the two security personnel flanking him were unyielding. "Sir, you must leave," one repeated, his tone devoid of warmth. "I'm not causing any trouble," Mac rumbled, his voice a low threat. "My son's graduating. I just want to witness him receive his diploma. Your name isn't on the approved list. You were directed to leave." The guard reached out, his hand closing on Mac's arm. Instinctively, Mac flinched, his muscles coiling. Years of hard-won reflexes, forged in unforgiving settings, rose within him. He clenched his fist. He didn't want a confrontation. Not here, not now. But he wouldn't be bullied. "Keep your hands off me," he warned, eyes narrowing into slits. Ignoring the warning, the guard tightened his grip on Mac's bicep. His partner moved in, effectively boxing him in. "Let's go, sir." Immediately. The pressure escalated, a dull throb radiating through his shoulder. Mac gritted his teeth, his gaze flicking towards the stage. He could see Jason, back turned, approaching the principal. "Please," Mac implored, his voice barely audible. "Just let me see him get it." The guards remained impervious. They began to steer him towards the exit, their hold firm and inescapable. Jason was nearly upon the principal. He saw the man's extended hand, the gleam of the diploma's casing. He reached, his fingertips grazing the smooth leather. Then, he registered the sound, the argument, the struggle. His head whipped around. His heart leaped into his throat. His father. He saw him grappling with two security guards, being forcibly escorted towards the exit. Mac's face was a rigid mask of suppressed rage, his eyes locked on Jason. The smile evaporated from Jason's face, replaced by a look of utter incomprehension and burgeoning dread. His hand dropped from the diploma. The cheers of the crowd dimmed to a distant hum, supplanted by a rising wave of nausea. What was happening? Why was his father being apprehended? He stood transfixed, immobilized by shock and fear, his graduation an afterthought. He could only focus on his father's expression, a complex blend of anger, frustration, and, was that shame? The principal's smile wavered, then disappeared. He glanced from Jason towards the unfolding scene at the rear of the auditorium, his polite demeanor replaced by concerned perplexity. A current of murmurs rippled through the audience as more and more heads turned towards the commotion. Max saw Jason's expression, the hurt and bewilderment etched into his features. A surge of guilt washed over him, drowning his fury. This wasn't the plan. This was supposed to be Jason's moment of glory, his deserved triumph, not a public scandal. He ceased resisting, his shoulders sagging in defeat. He yielded to the guard's escort, his gaze fixed on Jason. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, the words lost in the growing din. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. He took an unsteady step towards the edge of the stage, his hand outstretched in supplication. "Dad!" The cry tore from his throat, a ragged, desperate sound that cut through the surrounding noise. The guards tightened their hold on Mac, hustling him faster. They reached the exit doors and shoved him through, the heavy doors swinging shut behind them with a resounding boom. Jason stood alone on the stage, the unclaimed diploma lying discarded near the principal's feet. The applause had ceased entirely. The silence was absolute. He stared at the closed doors, his heart hammering against his ribs, a single, agonizing question echoing in his mind. Why? The silent entrance. The collective gasp rippled through the auditorium, a wave of displaced air that momentarily stalled the principal's droning congratulations. All eyes, which seconds before had been politely fixed on the stage, swiveled towards the main entrance. 6 figures filled the doorway, their sheer physical presence eclipsing the light spilling in from the late afternoon sun. They were dressed identically, each in a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the ambient light. No ties. The top button of each crisp white shirt was deliberately undone. Their faces, etched with a shared history of hardship and discipline, were impassive, almost sculpted from granite. They moved with a fluid, synchronized grace that belied their obvious strength. It wasn't arrogance that emanated from them, but a quiet, unwavering confidence that commanded attention. The 2 security guards, still flustered from their recent interaction with Mac, froze. Their hands instinctively moved towards their holstered weapons, then hesitated. These weren't rowdy teenagers or disgruntled parents. These were different. The air thickened with unspoken questions, with a primal awareness of danger that transcended the sterile environment of the graduation ceremony. The lead figure, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His gaze, sharp and intelligent, swept across the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on the principal, then moving on, dissecting the scene with practiced ease. He was Commander Richard "Rick" Williams, though no one in the auditorium knew that. They only saw the unwavering focus in his eyes, the subtle set of his jaw, the air of quiet authority that radiated from him. He raised a hand, a simple gesture that silenced the murmurs that had begun to bubble up. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, carrying clearly to the back of the hall without the aid of a microphone. "We're here for Michael McKinley," he announced. The statement hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with unspoken meaning. A ripple of unease spread through the audience. Jason, who had been halfway off the stage, frozen in place since calling out to Mac, felt a surge of something he couldn't quite identify, a strange mix of fear, relief, and a flicker of defiant pride. He knew, instinctively, who these men were, or at least, he knew what they were. Mac, standing just outside the double doors, his back pressed against the cool brick of the building, heard the commander's words. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew Rick's voice, knew the timbre and cadence, the subtle inflections that spoke volumes to those who understood them. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Rick Williams took another step into the auditorium, his gaze now fixed directly on the stage. Jason McKinley, your father is requesting your presence. His tone was neutral, devoid of accusation or judgment, yet it brooked no argument. The principal, his face flushed with a mixture of indignation and apprehension, sputtered, I don't understand. This is a graduation ceremony. We can't just— Rick Williams cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. The ceremony is concluded, wouldn't you say? His eyes flickered towards the empty space where Jason's name would have been called. Mr. McKinley's presence is required elsewhere. He turned his attention back to Jason, his expression softening slightly. Son, your father needs you. Jason didn't hesitate. He walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes locked on Rick Williams. He jumped down, landing with a soft thud, and without a word, walked towards the imposing figures. A path seemed to open for him, the graduating students parting like the Red Sea before Moses. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the bewildered faces of his classmates, the confused murmurs of the audience. His focus was solely on the men in suits, on the promise of connection, of understanding that they represented. As Jason reached the doorway, he finally saw his father. Mac hadn't moved, his stance rigid, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the parking lot. Jason stopped beside him, his shoulder brushing against his father's arm. The two security guards, finally finding their voices, stepped forward, blocking the exit. Sir, you can't just— Before they could finish their sentence, two of the figures in suits moved, flanking Mac and Jason. Their movements were so swift, so precise, that the guards barely registered what had happened before they were gently, but firmly, escorted away from the doorway. No threats were exchanged, no harsh words spoken, just a quiet, undeniable assertion of dominance. Rick Williams nodded once, a silent signal. He turned and led the way outside, his 5 companions forming a protective cordon around Mac and Jason. The auditorium, once filled with the hopeful energy of a graduating class, was now silent, save for the faint rustle of programs and the hushed whispers of disbelief. The only sound that mattered was the crunch of gravel under the 6 pairs of polished shoes as they walked away, taking Mac and Jason with them. An unbreakable bond. Commander Williams advanced, his very bearing a command that hushed the murmuring assembly. The carefully constructed atmosphere of graduation dissolved, yielding to a taut, expectant hush. His gaze swept across the sea of faces, pausing on the flustered principal, the aghast teachers, and the apprehensive students. Richard Williams, he announced, his voice a deep resonance that cut through the stillness. Commander, United States Navy, retired. A beat of silence amplified his words. I'm here for Michael McKinley. The 2 security guards, who had moments before strutted with misplaced confidence, now shuffled, suddenly unsure. The air thrummed with unspoken questions. Michael McKinley's name seemed to solidify the tension, hanging heavy as a shroud. Some of you know Michael as Jason's father, Williams continued, softening his gaze toward where Jason had been seated. Others, perhaps, as a quiet neighbor, a man who prefers solitude. I know him as Mac. Turning back to the crowd, his expression hardened into granite. I also know him as a hero, a goddamn Navy SEAL who served this country with unflinching valor. A wave of disbelief rolled through the audience. The image of the unassuming Mac, the man who faded into the background, now recast as a decorated warrior, strained credulity. Williams saw the skepticism mirrored in their expressions. Understandable, he conceded, a sharp edge entering his tone. Mac doesn't boast of his history, doesn't flaunt his accolades. He's a man of quiet strength. That, however, doesn't negate his deeds. He inhaled deeply, his eyes darkening with remembrance. I served with Mac in Echo Platoon. We witnessed horrors, sights that should never stain a soul. We faced perils that would freeze your marrow. A pause, his jaw ticking. Mac was always first through the door, last to leave. He risked everything, selflessly, for his brothers. He recounted a recently declassified mission, a hostage rescued deep within Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain. He painted a picture of treacherous landscape, suffocating heat, the ever-present specter of ambush. He spoke of the enemy's overwhelming numbers and merciless tactics. "We were trapped, outgunned, and bleeding dry," Williams recounted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The hostages faced imminent death. Hope seemed lost. Another pause, stretching the silence tight. That's when Mac moved. Alone, he blasted through the enemy's defenses, drawing their fire, buying us the precious seconds we needed to regroup and strike back. He saved those hostages. He saved us. A collective intake of breath swept the crowd. The heroic image of Mac began to solidify, taking root in their minds. Williams pressed on, recounting further acts of extraordinary bravery, selflessness etched in sacrifice. He spoke of Mac's unyielding devotion, his unbreakable spirit, the invisible wounds he carried. As he spoke, the two security guards visibly deflated, their earlier bravado leaching away, replaced by the growing comprehension of their egregious error. They had been prepared to banish a national treasure from his son's graduation. Williams concluded his impromptu tribute, his voice thick with emotion. "Mac has earned the right to stand here today. He's earned the right to witness his son's accomplishment. He deserves our respect, our dignity." His gaze locked onto the principal, unwavering. "Never forget that." He addressed the silent mass of onlookers once more. "There's more to Mac than you see at first glance. He's a good man, a brave man, and a damn fine father. He deserves our support, not our suspicion." The ensuing quiet hung heavy, broken only by the whisper of wind through the leaves. Then a slow, hesitant clapping began to ripple through the crowd, gathering strength, building into a surge of tumultuous applause. The audience, moved by Williams's powerful testament, rose to their feet, their faces alight with newfound admiration and respect. They were applauding not just Mac, but the ideals he embodied: courage, sacrifice, and unwavering love for his son. Redemption and reunion. Color flooded the security guards' faces as they sputtered their apologies. "Mr. McKinley, sir," the taller one managed, extending a placatory hand. We were unaware. Please accept our sincerest apologies." His partner, bobbing his head emphatically, eyes skittering between Mac and the audience, stammered, "Just following procedure, sir. We understand now. Please come through." He even retreated a step, widening the passage. Mac remained unmoved, his gaze a slow burn across their faces and then the expectant crowd. The applause had ebbed, replaced by a fraught quiet. Apologies held no currency for him, empty gestures ringing hollow. He needed to reach Jason. Commander Williams stepped into the breach, his voice, honed by command, slicing through the air. "That's enough. Mr. McKinley, join us. Jason is waiting." A curt nod dismissed the guards. "See to it that this isn't repeated." Mac finally moved, his polished boots a quiet tattoo on the floor as he passed the shamefaced pair. No acknowledgement, no absolution offered. The tight set of his jaw spoke volumes about the offense taken. He advanced with singular focus, his destination Jason. Entering the auditorium, the crowd yielded, forming a corridor. He felt their collective gaze, a potent cocktail of respect, curiosity, and perhaps even a hint of veneration. Ignoring them, he scanned the serried ranks of graduates in their cobalt gowns. It took him only a heartbeat to locate Jason. He sat ramrod straight, his eyes locked on Mac, his expression a shifting mosaic Mac struggled to read from afar. Relief warring with defiance, underpinned by hope. Approaching, Mac saw the tautness in Jason's jaw, the nervous clenching and unclenching of his hands. He reached out, laying a steadying hand on Jason's shoulder. Jason looked up, their eyes meeting. The anxiety, the uncertainty, seemed to dissipate like morning mist. A true smile blossomed on his face, chasing away the shadows. It was a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, a smile Mac hadn't witnessed in an age. "Dad," Jason whispered, the single word a fragile offering laden with emotion. Mac simply squeezed his shoulder, a silent vow of unwavering support. He glanced at the vacant seat beside Jason. Before he could speak, an usher materialized, swiftly placing a program. Max settled in, his presence a bulwark against Jason's inner storm. Jason turned back towards the stage, but the speaker's platitudes about a bright future faded into background noise. His entire universe had shrunk to the figure of his father, the stoic man seated beside him. A man who had stared down danger countless times, who had consistently been his anchor, who had just endured public indignity to witness his graduation. For the first time that day, Jason felt a profound calm. The ceremony, the accolades, the future stretching out before him. None of it held the same significance as his father's presence. The weight that had been crushing him, the fear of isolation, the trepidation about what lay ahead, seemed to lift, replaced by a burgeoning warmth. He risked another glance, catching Mac's eye. Mac offered a near imperceptible nod, a silent reassurance that echoed, "I'm here. I've got you." And in that instant, Jason knew everything would find its equilibrium. The past remained, a faint scar, but its power to wound had lessened. He had his father, and that was enough. He could confront anything, as long as Max stood beside him. He relaxed into his seat, a revitalized sense of purpose surging through him. This wasn't solely about graduating for himself. It was for his father, for the man who had given so much. He owed it to him to make a life of consequence, to honor his mother's memory, to prove that even in the face of profound loss, hope could ultimately triumph. A graduation shared. The roar of the crowd faded into a muted hum as Jason's name echoed through the stadium. He straightened his borrowed gown, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He walked deliberately, not rushing, not faltering. Each step was a tiny victory, a testament to the silent promise he'd made just moments ago. As he reached the head of the stage, he accepted the diploma with a firm handshake, his eyes scanning the crowd. He found Mac. His father stood separate from the throng, near the edge of the field, a solitary figure. Their eyes locked. A silent communication passed between them, a shared understanding that transcended words and circumstance. Jason held the gaze for a beat longer than necessary, a beacon of gratitude and love radiating from him, before turning to walk off the stage. He made his way down the steps, his path deliberately veering towards his father. Mac met him halfway, his hand resting briefly on Jason's shoulder. No words were spoken, none needed. The touch was enough, a grounding presence in the swirling chaos of the graduation ceremony. Then a wave of movement. The assembled seals, a phalanx of quiet power, parted ranks, allowing Jason to pass through. He was enveloped in a sea of familiar faces, weathered by sun and sea, their eyes reflecting a depth of experience he could only begin to imagine. "Proud of you, son," boomed a voice gruff but undeniably warm. It was Chief Miller, a man whose presence alone could command a room. He clapped Jason on the back, a gesture that threatened to knock him off balance. But Jason stood firm, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You earned this, Jason," Lieutenant Davies said, his voice a low rumble. "Now go out there and make something of it." Each SEAL offered a word of encouragement, a pat on the back, a firm handshake. Their words were simple, direct, and imbued with a sincerity that resonated deep within Jason. They weren't empty platitudes. They were the hard-earned wisdom of men who had stared into the face of adversity and emerged stronger. Commander Williams stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Your father is a good man, Jason. A brave man. Make him proud." He paused, then added, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "And try not to get into too much trouble." Jason swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. "I'll try, sir." As the SEALs dispersed, melting back into the crowd, the headmaster approached Mac, his face etched with contrition. He extended a hand, his voice laced with sincerity. "Mr. McKinley, I owe you an apology. There was a misunderstanding. I hope you can accept it." Mac regarded him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He finally nodded, a curt gesture that spoke volumes. Apology accepted. He had no interest in dwelling on the slight. His focus was solely on Jason. The headmaster, relieved, turned to Jason. Congratulations, Mr. McKinley. Your father must be very proud. Jason stood a little taller, his chest swelling with a newfound confidence. He is, sir, and I'm proud of him. He looked at his father, a spark of defiance still flickering in his eyes, but tempered now with respect and understanding. He knew now that he wasn't just graduating for himself. He was graduating for his father, for the legacy he represented. He was graduating into a world that suddenly felt a little less daunting, a little more full of possibilities. The borrowed gown no longer felt like a costume, but like a mantle of responsibility. He would carry it well. Ice cream and gratitude. The sugary scent of waffle cones perfumed the air, a welcome balm against the lingering unease from hours prior. Jason attacked a colossal scoop of cookie dough, a dollop of melted sweetness plastered to his cheek. Williams, ever practical, had chosen a simple vanilla cone. Max sipped black coffee, its acrid edge a familiar solace. They occupied a picnic table outside the ice cream shop as the sinking sun stretched their shadows long. A chorus of cicadas hummed in the background, an ambient soundtrack to their companionable quiet. This silence wasn't strained, but rather a shared space of unspoken understanding, of burdens lightened. At last, Jason surfaced, his face glowing with a sugar rush. "That was epic," he announced, waving a sticky hand. "Best graduation celebration, hands down." A ghost of a smile touched Mac's lips. "Glad you approve, kiddo." "Seriously, though," Jason pressed, leaning in. "Thanks, Dad. For everything. For being there. For, you know." Mac nodded, his gaze drifting towards the horizon. He understood the unspoken anxieties, the fragile hopes that had propelled Jason. He also grappled with his own inner storm, the perpetual tug-of-war between wanting to be present and fearing his impact on his son's life. "You earned every bit of this, Jason," Williams asserted, his tone firm yet gentle. "Your father merely provided a nudge." He offered a wink. Jason laughed, a pure, unburdened sound that soothed the knot in Mac's chest. "Nudge is one way to put it. I thought he'd instigate an all-out brawl back there." "Wouldn't be his first rodeo," Williams chuckled, drawing a rare smile from Mac. The quiet descended again, a comfortable cadence. Mac observed Jason drawing designs in the melting ice cream on the table. He appeared freer, more self-assured. The pressure of expectation, of proving himself, seemed to have dissipated. "So," Jason ventured, disrupting the hush. "What now?" Williams exchanged a glance with Mac. "Now," he began, "we savor the ice cream. Later, we discuss what lies ahead." "The future," Jason echoed, a flicker of apprehension returning to his voice. "Relax, kid," Mac reassured, his voice roughened but tender. "No queremos, just possibilities." The sun continued its descent, splashing the sky with shades of tangerine and amethyst. A soft breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying the redolence of honeysuckle. Mac took another swallow of his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him. He met William's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "Rick," Mac began, his voice hushed. Words fail me." Williams brushed it off. "Nonsense, Mac. We're practically family. Besides," he added with a mischievous spark, "you still owe me big time. Remember that escapade in Panama? The iguana debacle?" Mac groaned inwardly. "Spare me the details." Jason looked from one to the other, curiosity etched on his features. "Iguana debacle? A tale for another time, kid," Williams replied, winking. "A very distant time." Mac chuckled, the sound rusty but sincere. He hadn't laughed like that in ages. It felt good, it felt authentic. He looked at Williams, truly looked, and perceived beyond the commander, the SEAL, the unflinching professional. He saw a comrade, a confidant, a man who had stood by him through thick and thin, through sorrow and pain, through fits of unbridled fury and debilitating despair. A man who had never abandoned him, even when he had lost faith in himself. "Thank you, Rick," Mac said, his voice thick with feeling. "For being there." Williams simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Always, Mac." Again, silence enveloped them, But this time, it was different. A silence brimming with gratitude, with understanding, with a quiet pledge of steadfast support. It was the silence of chosen family, forged in shared trials and united by an enduring bond. Jason finished his ice cream, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked at his father, then at Commander Williams. A nascent sense of purpose shone in his eyes. The fear had receded, replaced by a subdued resolve. "So," he said, his voice ringing with clarity, "tell me about the future." Mac looked at Williams, then back at Jason. A subtle smile played on his lips. The future remained uncertain, undeniably. But for the first time in a long while, it felt less daunting. He knew, with a certainty that rooted itself deep within him, that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be sufficient.